Video games, like any medium, has had its defining titles, its landmark masterpieces. Donkey Kong Country, Arkham City, Final Fantasy VII, Mario 64, Minecraft, Dark Souls, Metal Gear Solid, Kingdom Hearts 2, Doom, and of course, Ocarina of Time. All these games came and brought something new to gaming. Their influence is all over the industry, from the smallest indies to the newest AAA titles. But to start, I want to talk about how these games are talked about. Now, if you're like me, and you spend a lot of time learning about games from strangers on YouTube, you probably heard about all these games. A sort of perception bloomed in my mind surrounding them. I thought of them as the sort of elite apex of what video games should be. Games with no low points, no difficulty spikes, nothing that could hinder the experience the devs wanted. Of course this wasn't true. It couldn't be. These games, while influential, all had problems, and some even have aged questionably. That statement doesn't revoke their status as iconic landmark titles that push video games forwards, nor does it diminish their actual quality. But as a kid with only a Wii and a PlayStation 2, I was limited to those console libraries, and limited further by what Blockbuster had to rent during my family's weekly visit. But as I aged and video games became what I was truly passionate about, I played most of these games. Some I did actually grow up with and naturally have a high opinion of, like Minecraft or the original Doom. Others I sought out and played to see why they were praised so heavily, like Final Fantasy VII or Dark Souls. Most lived up to the level of quality I expected, becoming some of my own favorite games. Some disappointed me, and none ever truly lived up to the level of expectation I had in my head of a game with the best combat, perfect pacing, engaging level design, and a fun story. So I continued on and played more games, trying to understand the evolutionary tree of influence that made up the modern video game industry. And then one day in the spring of 2021, I started a game I had heard about since I could search on YouTube. It was the 6th game in its franchise, not numerically, and I had played every previous game in that lineup before it. It was one game that everyone had told me was excellent, a game that had influenced every other game in its genre since its release, one that left an irrevocable mark on its own franchise, and one so popular that its publisher's first priority at every console release was to port it as soon as possible. And soon, it was a game that I couldn't stop playing. Resident Evil 4 is the 4th numbered entry in Capcom's landmark survival horror franchise, Resident Evil. Released in 2005, close to 6 years after Resident Evil 3, the game was met with rave reviews from players and media outlets alike. It was initially released as a GameCube exclusive, but a port to the PlayStation 2 was released less than a year later, and it even included extra content. The game was a departure from the horror roots of the franchise, leaning much more into action. The pre-rendered backgrounds and set camera angles were ditched in favor of an over-the-shoulder view, giving the game the perspective of a third-person shooter. The slower combat of the original games were now replaced by faster action, with you now being able to jump through windows, shoot enemy weapons and projectiles out of the air, and wield higher power guns. The game has a huge inventory of firearms to choose from, encouraging experimentation with a variety of playstyles. The new merchant can even upgrade your firearms to make them even more lethal. But be warned, there are huge hordes of enemies, and a great variety of them that challenge your firepower. And with massive bosses that will stand up to even hardened veterans of the action horror genre, you'll need every bullet you can find. The game takes place after the fall of the Umbrella Corporation and the destruction of Raccoon City, with returning Resident Evil 2 protagonist, Leon S. Kennedy, sent to a remote region of Spain to rescue the US president's daughter, Ashley, from a disturbed cult controlled by an ancient parasite. The Los Illuminados, controlled by Osmond Sadler through Las Plagas, plan to send an infected Ashley back to her father in a bid to control the world and infect everyone with their divine gift. As Leon, he must protect Ashley and fight through hordes of infected villagers, zealots, soldiers, not to mention the more unsightly creatures that Sadler controls. While fighting Sadler's most dedicated followers, Leon meets new friends and old enemies and discovers that maybe Umbrella isn't as dead as it seems. After an unforgettable struggle for survival fighting man mixed with monster, Leon and Ashley stop their own infection, defeat the crazed Sadler, all before escaping the nightmare in style. Resident Evil 4 is held up as one of the greatest video games of all time, and is regarded by many as the peak of the Resident Evil franchise. The game went on to inspire countless other games, like Dead Space, Gears of War, The Last of Us, and many more. It's no surprise that Resident Evil 4 was quickly ported or made playable on not just the PlayStation 2, but to every subsequent major console release across the PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo brands, as well as PC via Steam. But the game wasn't always conceptualized as the genre-defining masterpiece that we know it as today. The director of Resident Evil 2, Hideki Kamiya, originally set forth to develop the franchise's 4th installment. He created a version of Resident Evil 4 in which a cop, Tony Redgrave, explored a castle trying to discover the origins of his creation and unravel other secrets of Umbrella. The heavy focus on action made Capcom skeptical of its place in the Resident Evil franchise, but instead of course-correcting the enigmatic Kamiya, Capcom opted to create a new franchise with the concept, that being Devil May Cry. And so, Shinji Mikami, creator of the Resident Evil franchise, was called in to helm the true fourth entry. After several attempts at making a sequel to Resident Evil 3 with gameplay faithful to the franchise's past, Mikami and his team became frustrated with the old formula. So they threw out their concepts and made the game they wanted to. With a focus on spectacle and action, and a general removal from the previous game's story, the final version of Resident Evil 4 was developed and released as we know today in 2005. To me, Resident Evil 4 is the video game that I was told about in all those videos. Its gameplay is exhilarating, its mechanics are satisfying to learn, its level design is thoughtful, and its story is wonderfully campy. I had played all the previous mainline Resident Evil games, and I had a lot of fun so far, especially with the very first. And while I was initially kind of surprised at how much of a departure it was from those first few games, I was still blown away by how consistently enjoyable the devs had made the new style. To me, everything about this game is satisfying. Killing enemies, upgrading guns, finding treasure, organizing your inventory, they're all in service of some incredibly well-made systems that make any small engagement gratifying. It's also a game full of set pieces, big and small, that are all paced masterfully. It's got a great lineup of enemies that synergize well with the environments, with both the player and them getting opportunities to use it to their advantage. The presentation is excellent. Even for a game from 2005, the visuals still look pretty good, especially in regards to character and enemy models, even if the textures are kind of crunchy. The great voice acting also goes a long way to make the cheesier lines in the script iconic. Speaking of which, the characters are excellent, with cunning villains like Krauser and Salazar you love to hate, as they fight with Leon, who himself is a cocky and quick-witted hero. Not to mention the always charming Louise and the return of the titillating and deceptively dangerous Ada Wong. And the influence it has had on its franchise is pretty clear, with Resident Evil 5 swapping the European setting for Africa and adding a player 2, along with even more over-the-top action. While I don't think it's nearly as good as its predecessor, it's still a great game in its own right. Resident Evil 4 is my favorite Resident Evil, and one of my favorite games, full stop. I feel like GLaDOS. It's really hard to overstate my satisfaction in Resident Evil 4 as a product. It's just so well-rounded, so quality, so complete. It's no wonder why Capcom presses the port button every time a new console is released. People like me are willing to double and sometimes even triple dip for it in order to play it on the go or in VR. It's an excellent game. I think so, the critics think so, everyone seems to agree. And Capcom agreed too. As discussed, Resident Evil 5 was an expansion of Resident Evil 4's gameplay in almost every way, with the action commands, gun upgrading, and third-person shooting through huge set pieces. But that also begot the slog that was Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 feels like a beta for a Platinum game, but like a really bad Platinum game. It has interesting ideas for movement in a third-person action game, and you can certainly have fun with that part of it, but it's broken up by these horribly slow segments of walking or following, and the game is split into 4 boring campaigns where there are constant moments of attempted crossover that fall flat in their face because none of the set pieces are particularly interesting or engaging like in 4 or 5. With critics lambasting the game for its repetition, and hardcore Resident Evil fans hating the game for its complete abandonment of survival horror, Capcom had to go back. Because they went too far in a few places. 6 years later, we got Resident Evil 7. Powered by the new RE engine, the game was slow, it was atmospheric, it was puzzle and resource focused, it took place in a residence, and there was evil. The game got away from the story of the previous entries, it marked a shift in the gameplay and perspective, and influenced the games that came after it. Sound familiar? In many ways, Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 are similar in that way. They both marked a necessary shift in the franchise, one that left ripples across all the games that came after it. But what's really important is the engine. The RE engine. The RE engine was specifically made for Resident Evil 7 at first, but it's proven to be an extremely versatile piece of software, as it went on to power Resident Evil 8, Devil May Cry 5, and Dragon's Dogma 2. But more importantly, the second RE engine game released was Resident Evil 2, the remake of Resident Evil 2. While the original Resident Evil had already been remade back in 2002 and ported forward to modern systems, Resident Evil 2 was yet to get a remake of its own. With Hideki Kamiya himself campaigning for it, development of the remake started sometime after Resident Evil 7 itself began development. And the remake of Resident Evil 2 released to very positive reviews from players and critics in 2019. It seemed that development on the RE engine made the creation of games much easier. Why make a whole new engine if you can just use this versatile and modern pre-made one that the devs 2 offices down are already working with? And before the end of the year, Capcom announced Resident Evil 3 Remake, with it planned for release in 2020. Apparently, the remake of 2 and the remake of 3 were developed almost perpendicularly to each other, and the remake of 3 was very nearly ready. Released in April of 2020, Resident Evil 3 Remake was enjoyed by critics, but hardcore fans were very disappointed by many of the changes made to the game. In particular, much of the game had been cut or simplified, and Nemesis was made much less of a threat, with some speculating that his reduced presence was the reason his name was removed from the game's title. While the original was already the shortest of the original Resident Evil trilogy, many felt that the remake went too far in reducing the game's scope and undercutting the source material. So at this point, in early 2020, Capcom has successfully remade the first 3 Resident Evil games. The games with the awkward controls and set camera angles replaced with a third-person perspective, all in this new engine. Well, except for the remake of the first one. All these games are on modern consoles. In fact, the whole franchise is. Resident Evil 0 through 8, with Code Veronica and the Revelations games all playable at the modern gamer's fingertips. So what now? They remade 1, and then 2 much later, and then 3 immediately afterwards. And they were arguably too fast for that last one. So the natural next step would be... No. They wouldn't. They would do Code Veronica, or 0 instead. I was convinced. The fact that Resident Evil 4 was already on modern consoles and the backlash from the remake of 3 had to have convinced them. Because if they tried to remake a game that was this beloved and messed up like they had with 3, the reaction would be Resident Evil 6 all over again, squandering all the goodwill they had built up with Resident Evil fans. So what motivation could they possibly have? It's already been done, and done damn well. At this point, in 2020, Capcom has no reason to remake Resident Evil 4. Other than money.
Located baby eagle.
Resident Evil 4 Remake was first revealed in June of 2022. Following up on the remake of 3, this game was set to release March 24th, 2023. I was there. I saw it happen. You want to see the exact frame where my brain panicked? It was this one. The moment I intuited that I was seeing an R with some woods along with a guitar, it all made horrible sense. Why was I so horrified, though? Well, I've only ever played the remake of Resident Evil 3, never the original, and I had been kind of dismissive towards a lot of that game's problems when it came to altering or cutting content. So I saw this as some ironic twist, that my favorite Resident Evil game was about to undergo something similar. Now, as a general rule, I don't watch trailers anymore. I don't really like engaging with the game's marketing if it's something I know I'm gonna buy. It only serves to spoil things for me. I did this with Tears of the Kingdom, and I was very disappointed at the world Nintendo decided to reuse. But I also did this with Elden Ring, and I was blown away by the world FromSoft made. That's to say, it's not a perfect system. I did it with Resident Evil 4 Remake because I already knew what I had in store. I've already played a game called Resident Evil 4 after all, and I didn't want to see how things were altered until I was playing it myself. And good thing too, those trailers spoil a lot of this game. I'd argue too many excellent moments were showcased, especially in Trailer 3. And before playing it, I was an absolute doomer. I was positive that most weapons would be gone, Krauser would be gone, a majority of the set pieces would be cut. I wasn't exactly optimistic. And when it did release, it took me 4 days to start playing it. Not because I was busy, but because I was honestly kind of intimidated about what I had in store. Did Capcom ruin it? Did I just spend $60 on something I would hate? And on my first day of finally playing the remake, I just remember dying over and over again to the opening village fight. Less because it was difficult, and more so because I wasn't trying. It's like I didn't want to go on because of how preemptively disappointed I was in everything I thought was gone or changed. I remember small things upsetting me arbitrarily, like Dr. Salvador dropping a jewel instead of the gold bars, or the placement of certain buildings on the farm. Totally irrelevant things that, looking back, have zero impact on my opinion of this game as a remake. I think I was just looking to nitpick and self-fulfill my own destiny of hating the remake. But eventually, I got to the end of the first chapter, and there were some things that surprised me. Some things that I thought were very, very charmingly faithful. So I stuck through it, and I was surprised. Soon enough, I couldn't stop playing it. For now, I'll leave it at that. I have quite a bit more time to discuss my opinion on every part of this remake later in this video, but my overall thoughts? It's pretty excellent. Not as good as the original, but I'll be damned if it's not close. It's a very good remake, and one of the best new games I've played in recent times. I finished it, and I was happy. I had no faith in Capcom, but they delivered in spite of my rock-bottom expectations. They added new content, expanded the lore, and gave a fresh coat of RE engine paint to an already excellent-looking game. And that is with all of the differences and contrasts between it and the original fresh in my mind. Because in the lead-up to the release of the remake, I had replayed the original twice, once on my Switch and once in VR, so I was very aware of everything kept, changed, and cut. But then I started thinking about that. Some set pieces were so ridiculous, I expected them to go. Others that I thought were for sure goners stayed. Many were changed in novel ways, a few had even merged together. Many set pieces had changed position, some occurring much later or earlier than before. Some rooms you did in reverse, and some one-off puzzles or obstacles in the original had become recurring roadblocks in the remake. Characters and villains were changed, some of the story too, and the game seemingly ends with a story diversion away from what happens in Resident Evil 5, which may give insight to Capcom's next move with this recent string of remakes. And most notably, there was new stuff, new places in old areas, new enemies, new set pieces, new weapons, new systems, and new unlocks and cosmetics. Even though it is a remake, this game was clearly a very high-effort piece of work. A lot was put into this to recreate so much of the original and bring so much new stuff to the table at the same time. Mercenaries, a Resident Evil staple, was released shortly after launch, and Separate Ways, the extra campaign that was a part of the original RE4's PS2 port, was added as a paid DLC expansion a few months after the remake was released. Altogether, it's a big game. I have all the achievements and unlocks, and I've apparently spent quite a few hours getting them all. For a long while, I've been pondering the changes the remake made to the original and why it made them. So I thought, why don't we look at all this? Let's look at every change, everything new, everything cut. Why is Resident Evil 4 so good? Why is Resident Evil 4 Remake so good too? Was it despite the changes it made, or was it because of them? That's what I want to find out. I've played both games so many times thinking about this that I've gotten really curious, and I think other people are curious too. I'll be going over the main story of both games, chapter by chapter, comparing each to how it was remade 18 years after the fact. In the original Resident Evil 4, chapters were titled with a section and subsection, i.e. 1-2 or 4-3 and so on. Kinda like Demon's Souls or Super Mario. While the remake goes for the much easier to understand chapter 1, 2, and so on. Some chapters were merged together, so I'll occasionally talk about two original sections in a row before talking about the remake chapter that they were translated to. I'll be giving my personal thoughts on everything we talk about, but I primarily want this video to exist as an objective account of all the differences between both versions of Resident Evil 4. The remake does a great job hiding and obfuscating some of its changes from experienced players like me, but the joke's on it. I got notes. I'll be talking about set pieces, guns, combat, difficulty, treasure, art direction, sound and music, characters and story, and much, much more at regular intervals. So with that established, let's talk about how Capcom blew the world away in 2005, and how they tried to do it all over again in 2023. This is the tale of two rescue missions. This is Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake, an exhaustive comparison.
Resident Evil 4.
To begin, the game opens with a cutscene in which our protagonist, Leon S. Kennedy, discusses the events of the viral outbreak in Raccoon City during the events of the first three games.
I'll never forget it. It was the year when those grisly murders occurred in the Arklay Mountains. Soon after, the news was out to the whole world, revealing that it was the fault of a secret viral experiment conducted by the international pharmaceutical enterprise, Umbrella. The virus broke out in a nearby mountain community, Raccoon City, and hit the peaceful little town with a devastating blow crippling its very foundation. Not taking any chances, the President of the United States ordered a contingency plan to sterilize Raccoon City. With the whole affair gone public, the United States government issued an indefinite suspension of business decree to Umbrella. Soon its stock prices crashed, and for all intents and purposes, Umbrella was finished. Six years have passed since that horrendous incident.
Moving on, the game plays some sweet kumbaya as it cuts to Leon and two Spanish officers driving down a desolate forest road on an overcast day.
I received special training via a secret organization working under the direct control of the president. I was to assume the responsibility of protecting the new president's family.
Coño, why am I the one who always gets the short end of the stick?
You, who are you really? Come on and tell us. You are a long way from home, cowboy. You have my sympathies.
Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice. Anyway, you know what this is all about. My assignment is to search for the president's missing daughter.
What? All by yourself?
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire. Then again, maybe you did.
Oh, you crazy American. It's a direct order from the chief himself. I tell you, it's no picnic.
I'm counting on you guys. It was right before I was to take on my duties of protecting the president's daughter when she was abducted. That's the ultimate reason I'm in this lonely and rural part of Europe. According to our intelligence, there's reliable information about a sighting of a girl that looks very similar to the president's daughter. Apparently, she's being withheld by some unidentified group of people. Who would have thought that my first job would have been a rescue mission?
It's freezing. So cold all of a sudden. Must be my imagination. Sorry it took so long.
Just up ahead is the village.
I'll go and have a look around.
Yeah, we'll stay and watch that car. Don't want to get any parking tickets.
Right. Parking tickets.
Good luck.
Jeez. Who are these guys?
Did you say something?
Just before we gain control of Leon, we get our first radio call.
Leon, I hope you can hear me. I'm Ingrid Hunnigan. I'll be your support on this mission.
Here we meet Hunnigan. She exists mostly to guide you around during the first third of the game, but she and Leon have plenty of witty exchanges in that time.
That's right. She's the daughter of the president, so try to behave yourself, okay?
Whoever this group is, they sure picked the wrong girl to kidnap.
I'm sorry if this first few bits of explanation are boring, but I'll be explaining a lot of basic movements and actions that Leon can do now that we have control of him. You can aim your equipped weapon with the left trigger and shoot with the right. You move with tank controls and press the bottom face button to run while walking.
Not that way, cowboy.
The tank controls means that you can't just turn a hard left or hard right. You instead need to loop around while walking, or you need to turn in place before moving at all. You can walk backwards, but you can press the stick back and the run button at the same time to flip around 180 degrees. Now that we have the basic movement established, time to shoot some crows. They have pesetas, or PTAs for short, and one even has a spinal. We'll talk about these goodies later. Walking just past them gets you a short cutscene of Leon being watched from the house ahead. If you take a moment to open your inventory, you'll find that you start with a few things, one of which of course being your handgun, and another being your first aid spray. And that green dial in the corner is of course your health, and that number is representative of the current number of rounds in your gun. If you go to the left of the house, you'll find a crate on a wagon. If you hold down the left bumper, you'll pull out your knife, and you can swing with the right trigger to break the box. There are many, many breakables just like this one throughout the whole game, all with the same off-white tan colors so you know that they're different from the rest of the props in the environment. They contain all sorts of things, like green and red herbs for healing, ammo for shooting, and sometimes treasure, but also sometimes nothing at all. In the house, we meet a pretty normal man tending a fire, and Leon asks him about Ashley.
Excuse me. Sir? I was wondering if you might recognize the girl in this photograph?
¿Qué carajo estás haciendo aquí? ¡Lárgate, cabrón!
Sorry to have bothered you.
Freeze! I said freeze!
And so we learn how to fight. You can shoot this guy anywhere and he will flinch. Hitting him in the chest, arms, legs, or head will cause him to stop moving forward and falter slightly. Something you might notice immediately is that a shot to the head leads to a much longer stagger. He goes down quickly.
Is everything okay?
There was a hostile local. I had no choice but to neutralize him. There are still others surrounding the area.
Get out of there and head toward the village. Take whatever measures necessary to save the subject.
Understood.
If you go under the stairs, you'll find some maggot-laced skulls, and Leon will give some thoughts. Leon does this a lot. It's a sort of carryover from the previous Resident Evil games, where your character will give thoughts on things in the environment if you interact with them. There's flavor text like this everywhere. Going up the stairs gets you your first bit of ammo, and a window to dive straight out of. At this point, you fight 3 more enemies, and knowing that they will stagger with any connective shot will help you keep them at bay. Once they die, you might notice them drop more pesetas, or handgun ammo. This screen showing the item appears every single time you pick something up, but luckily you can mash through it in a split second. With the path forward as our only option, we trundle ahead finding the first typewriter, a Resident Evil staple, as a place to save your game. Only this time, there are no ink ribbons required. On this trail, you'll find some markers for direction and some skulls hanging from effigies of this cross-like symbol. A few steps ahead and you'll find a dog in a bear trap. Shooting the dog will make it run away, but being nice and freeing him makes him run off too. But something tells me he'll remember your act of kindness. There's another bear trap hidden in the foliage here. Getting trapped by one does some damage, but it does immobilize you as well for several seconds, leaving you open for attack. And the game introduces the trip mines. The trip mines will explode if you or an enemy walks into their wire, but you can shoot the bomb or the wire to set it off prematurely. The trail winds on with more enemies, a few more huts with boxes, and a bridge connecting over a stream. There's even a woman hanging out here. Through a gate, we finally reach the true opening set piece, the village. Hunnigan calls you and sends you the playing manual, which is just an explanation of the basic controls. You can take a moment watching the villagers go about their menial daily tasks while one of the cops from earlier gets cooked European style on this burn pile. Now, it's time to approach the village. Diplomacy has failed, but thank God we have roundhouse kicks. Now, when an enemy is hit in certain ways, you have the chance for a melee attack. In the head, and you can give a huge sweeping kick, sending them flying backwards. In the knees, and you can kick them with more of a forward stomping motion, causing them to fall on their backs. and if other enemies are around, they get caught up in the melee, either going flying themselves or being pushed back by the action. And the best part? From the moment you press the button to the moment the animation finishes, you are invincible. And the damage it causes ain't too bad either. It's a great risk-reward mechanic, especially if there are lots of enemies around. Given that the whole village has now been alerted to our presence, it's probably best to seek refuge in this house with an open door, which plays a cutscene.
No dejes que se escape. Vayan por detrás.
Who are these people?
Bloqueale el paso.
What are they planning? Chainsaw. Shit.
Te voy a matar.
Son of a...
You can push this cabinet to bar this window and buy yourself some time, and heading upstairs gets you your second weapon, the shotgun. And in the cabinet next to it, a hand grenade. Perfect, because the loud mechanical roaring outside takes some real firepower to silence. This is Dr. Salvador, the chainsaw-wielding baghead of the village. He has tons of health, only flinches when hit repeatedly or very hard, and he can kill you in one attack with his chainsaw. You'll not only need to deal with him, but also all the other villagers in a fight to survive. While we're getting pursued, why don't we talk about the enemies? Enemies with pitchforks have a long range for damage, and the enemies with smaller weapons will attack if they approach. If you put distance between the ones holding smaller weapons, they'll actually throw them at you, and you can shoot them straight out of the air, which is an easy enough skill to learn since they follow a pretty consistent arc. Although their accuracy is inconsistent at best. If they don't have a weapon, they'll grab you, and you have to mash to escape. The longer you take mashing, the more damage you'll take. But if they grab you from behind, you'll take no damage, but you will be open to further attacks from other enemies. But retreating from a group of enemies is always a valid option. You have plenty of options, onto the roofs, through the windows, in and around the buildings. You can even kick down the ladders after you climb up them to stop enemies from following you, although they will raise them back up. There's plenty of supplies and boxes around if you're low on ammo, and you can even go into this tower for an easy win. But if you're tough enough and smart enough with your shotgun shells and grenade, Dr. Salvador goes down.
Oh, la campana.
Es hora de rezar. Tenemos que irnos.
Lord Sattler.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
After the title drop, you get another call from Hunnigan directing you to the farm, since the door to the chapel is locked. If you explore the village, you'll find a locked door with a huge lock on it. These locks are only 3 kicks or an attack away from breaking. Even a simple knife swing breaks them. While going back through the town, you'll probably find a flash grenade. These grenades do no damage, but they do stun enemies and leave them open for melee attacks. Make sure you keep at least one in your inventory for later on. Once you clean up the supplies from the village and you're on your way to the farm, you might find a note talking about Leon. The files are saved in the inventory menu, and you can read them whenever. There's lots of these, and many have their text displayed on top of a pre-rendered background, which show what's being talked about. You actually start with that photo of Ashley as a file, with it explaining that it was likely an insider who kidnapped her, and that the Secret Service is being interrogated one by one to find out who. Speaking of the menu, you'll also find a map in there, which will fill in as you explore the current area. It'll mark your objective, typewriters, and a few other things. Onto the farm, you'll find 2 barns, a few smaller huts, and a note telling you to destroy some blue medallions scattered around. Most of them are hanging in high places. There are some more enemies, some wielding pitchforks and some wielding scythes. There are 2 treasures here. One is the first combinable treasure, the other is the pearl pendant, hanging above this well of disgusting water. You'll need to shoot the bar holding up the covering to make it drop, covering up the water, and giving a place for the pendant to land if you shoot. Should it fall into the water, you can still pick it up, but now it's the dirty pearl pendant, and it'll be worth much less. You might notice some eggs lying around, if none were in the village. They're the smallest item in the game, and the white and brown ones heal you a small amount. But the rare gold chicken egg gives you a full heal. Better yet, you can equip them and egg the enemies. The chickens running about will drop these with some regularity, but they also might drop them if you kill them. Speaking of animals running around, that dog from earlier is here. The path splits at the end of the farm. If you get over this fence by using the ramparts attached to the big barn, you'll get to this door by the windmill, which you can't open. Going down the path on the right leads you to a long pathway in a canyon, and your casual stroll down is interrupted by a giant boulder rolling at you at incredible speeds, and now you have to mash the bottom face button and react in time to the dodge prompt to escape. This is a QTE, or QuickTime event. There are many of these. They prompt you to either mash a button or press 1 or 2 very quickly. The cost of failure is instant death in all cases. And since so many are sudden, you'll probably have a bad time finding them all in your first playthrough since they happen in cutscenes too. With the boulder broke, we go through this tunnel and to a clearing with a few more rickety buildings. And here we see that the villagers have traded their axes and scythes in for dynamite. They threw it in the same arc towards you, and shooting it causes it to explode, meaning you can save yourself from an inaccurate shot. But this is risky. Sometimes it's better to charge forward past a stick flying your way to get out of its radius, instead of shooting it while it's an arm's length away from you. It's a split-second decision that you need to consider carefully, since it could literally blow up in your face. Better yet, just shoot the enemies while they're still holding it. They'll blow up instantly. They need to light it before throwing it, and that gives you some time to line up your sight on it. In this area, there are a few of these dynamiters, along with a trip bomb and bear traps, which would make you easy pickings for their explosives. In the yard of this big house, there's a nest containing a cat's eye if you shoot it. Nests like these can be found scattered about, and they always contain something worthwhile. Entering the house, you'll find more traps and a prevalent knocking sound. Reaching its source, you find a Spaniard.
Little rough, don't you think? You're not like them?
No. You?
Okay, I have only one very important question. You got a smoke?
Got gum.
Perfect. The big cheese.
What?
And with that, the section ends. Every time you finish a section, you'll get a screen like this, which will show your accuracy, deaths, and number of enemies killed. It'll also prompt you to save and show you what's up next. Overall, I'd say the first section is an excellent introduction to many of the game's core mechanics. You get combat experience against one enemy, then you fight a small group, a large group and a mini-boss, and then you meet a few different kinds of enemies, and learn that some are much more lethal than others. The village rewards you with supplies for exploring it, teaching a player to comb the environments, and you run into several traps at the start and end of the section, teaching you to be aware of your surroundings. And you even encounter, and probably die to, the first QTE. You get the plot set up, and some insight into the events of the Resident Evil world since the last game, and you also find out that something's very, very wrong with these villagers. And once you reach the end, you meet one of the game's main antagonists, along with one of the secondary characters.
Little rough, don't you think?
Sections in this game vary a lot in length, but this is one of the shortest, only spanning 4 maps and having pretty minimal plot outside the opening. Now let's see how the remake handles all of this. To begin, again, the game opens up with Leon S. Kennedy monologuing to himself about the outbreak in Raccoon City.
September 30th, 1998. It's a day I'll never forget. The cop inside me died that day. And that night, Raccoon City was wiped out. thanks to the bioweapons created by Umbrella. Somehow I made it out, but too many others weren't so lucky. I was asked later to join a top-secret government program. Not that I had a choice. The training, punishing missions, nearly killed me. But at least I kept my mind off everything. If I could just forget what happened that night, the pain, even for a second. This time, it can be different. It has to.
And once again, he's in that car, being asked the same questions. The disposition of the police stays similar, and so does the dialogue.
So tell me, Yankee, why did you come to this horrible place? As close to nowhere that I've ever seen.
Let's just say, looking for someone.
That someone must be very important, huh? The chief gave the orders himself. Help him, he said.
I'm sure you boys didn't come all the way out here to roast marshmallows. Maybe you did.
You have a strange sense of humor. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Just between us. A lot of people have gone missing around here. And it's been that way for a while now.
Well then, should be just another day in the office, right?
I mean, last week there was a search for some missing hikers.
I'm sure you'll do your best to help me.
I think this is it.
And again, we stop because one has to piss.
Nature calls, huh? I'll be right back. Qué frío.
¿Te has bebido el bar entero? You smoke?
Vaya sitio más tétrico. ¡Hey! ¿Hay alguien ahí?
Only this time, he doesn't come back.
He sure is taking his time. Did he fall in? Maybe you better go and take a look. Oh, watch the car. Wouldn't want to get a parking ticket.
So much for helping me.
Leon leaves to go find him, and we gain control of him. This game controls much more like a modern third-person shooter. You can move in any direction, sprint with R3, and you have full camera control. Aiming with your guns and knife works the same, only now you can press just R2 to swing your knife once. Heading forward, you'll see that there are no crows.
How far could he have gone?
Also, Hunnigan doesn't call us here. Her screen time has been reduced even further from the original, although we will meet her up ahead. You'll find some disturbing sights on this trail before you reach a house.
Anyone home?
Inside the house, you'll find an effigy. Heading further inside, you'll find a man tending a fire.
sorry to barge in like this. Busco a un policía. Vino aquí? This is not good.
You'll find the officer's badge and a key with that same insignia. It'll open the door to the basement, where behind a curtain you'll find the officer's body.
Hey! I read you. What's your situation? What the hell's going on? What was that?
And down the stairs comes the first enemy. The man from earlier, with a broken neck, twitching and squealing and grabbing. He is very much unlike the first enemy from the original, as he does not flinch a bit when shot. If he grabs you, and he likely will, you'll take damage, and you can either mash to escape like in the original, or use your knife to escape instantly. With this guy down, you can go back upstairs and find another enemy bursting out of a door. If you head behind him and go up the stairs, you'll find a map that points to where Ashley might be.
Bruce, this is Condor 1.
Hunnigan here. What's your sit rep?
President's daughter, Baby Eagle. It's likely she's in this village.
Our intel was correct then. Well done.
Need a location on a nearby lake. She may have been taken there.
Copy that. I'll see what I can find.
Hurry up. Something's happened to the people here. My escorts are... Gotta go. Talk later. I'll let myself out.
And here, you find yourself on the trail. You can now, finally, shoot the crows, and cross the bridge, and find your first typewriter. If you take a moment to open your inventory, you'll see that you start with just about all the same things as you do in the original. You'll probably notice that all of the breakables are now slathered in yellow paint. We will talk about this. You'll find that picking up an item will display it on the side of the screen the first time you find it, and then from there on you'll just get a small notification in the upper right side of the screen every subsequent time you find it. This is a good and expected quality of life update, so now you don't have to mash buttons in order to pick up a large collection of enemy drops and get constantly assaulted by the screen telling you exactly what you picked up. The trailer remains mostly the same, but with a lot of these buildings being very decrepit now. You then get ambushed by the first few traditional enemies in the game. The enemies themselves are now much more resilient. A single shot to the head in the original would guarantee you a melee opportunity. In the remake, you need to shoot them a few times in the head in order to get a melee opportunity, and a few times anywhere, in fact, to get them to stagger at all. Their weapons stay similar, but now the pitchfork villagers can charge through a crowd and impale Leon. And there are now shovel villagers who can do the same thing. If you kill these two, one is almost guaranteed to start spazzing out on the ground, and you can stab him with your knife to get him to stop. If you fail to stab him, he gets up with a broken neck and renewed vigor. Now he'll be the same Desnukedo enemy you fought in the opening, which is a new type of enemy exclusive to the remake. Desnucado, meaning broken neck in Spanish. I'll be going over enemies later, don't worry. You'll also find an old truck here as an allusion to the one that blocked your way backwards in the original. You'll also notice the dog is gone. This is the first instance of something being moved in the remake. The dog is in this game, he's just a bit later on. Same with the tripwire bombs, although you do step right into a bear trap, but they don't hurt you anymore, they just disable your movement. Once you reach the gate to the village, you'll probably notice a few things. One being that there are no load screens between maps, unlike the original. It's subtle, but it really helps with immersion, I feel. And now, we get to our same view of the village as in the original, complete with the second officer getting cooked. Now here's a new mechanic the remake introduces. Stealth. You can crouch down and move quietly in enemies where enemies haven't seen you yet. Opening doors or breaking boxes will alert them, but if you can get close to one without it noticing you, you can do a stealth kill. And at this point, you may notice that your knife has broken. The knife now has durability, and using it to escape from enemy clutches, stealth killing, or parrying will damage it to the point of breaking. Yes, that's right, you can now parry enemies' axes and scythe swings for melee hits. It can even parry those weapons when thrown at you, out of the air. But just like your knife, stealth can't last forever, and so we end up back in the house like in the original.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me. My lucky day.
And from here, it's pretty similar. You get the shotgun, the grenade, you can kick down this ladder, but you can't dive out the window like you could in the cutscene from earlier. And of course, the good Dr. Salvador arrives to saw you in half. He is even more dangerous, as he can now charge forward with a chainsaw and block your shots with it. And he's even more resilient to gunfire to boot, but if you stun him, you can stab him for massive damage, assuming your knife has survived. And if he's really got you cornered, you can parry his saw with your knife, which destroys the knife, but his saw is disabled for a moment, letting you potentially get some shots in. While running from the doctor, you'll find that the hiding spot in the tower drops you when the floor... And if you run through the stable, its lamp will fall and the cow will run around madly while on fire. If you head behind the certain houses, Dr. Salvador will chop their supports in an attempt to corner you, which is honestly kind of terrifying. Luckily, there's a few new areas and windows, so you have more rats to avoid the villager horde, which is now much bigger and faster. Make sure to use your flash grenade. You get this one for free on the path here. If you pull through and kill the doctor, he'll drop a jewel instead of pesetas. Interesting. With his death, the bell rings.
You gotta be kidding me.
Huh?
La campana. Hay que obedecerla.
Él nos invoca. Tenemos que servir. Al Lord Sadler Todopoderoso.
They're not. They get different the longer they go. There is an argument that the first third of that video was irrelevant.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
After another call from Hunnigan, you might start noticing the new items the remake has, like gunpowder and the small resource. These are used for the remake's new item crafting system. I'll give this mechanic its own section later on, but just know for now that they're pretty common drops, and you'll be seeing them a lot in the remake footage. You'll also notice how much more vocal Leon is in the remake.
It's my lucky day.
He will now talk and comment about the enemies or the situations you find yourself in.
One down. That was not easy.
In the original, he's mostly silent outside of an occasional grunt during a melee. The village has two big additions. First is this small nook overlooking the path into the village, and the second we won't see for a while. If we continue to the farm, you'll see that some of the buildings have been moved around, and the middle passage has now been blocked with debris. And the windmill is now massive and has a fully explorable interior. You'll still find a note asking you to deal with the blue medallions, although now they're only at the farm. Speaking of shooting things, you'll see some new farm animals, and discover that there's a new treasure puzzle. This time you need to shoot the hang lantern on the windmill at the right part of its rotation so it doesn't fall into the water. You'll have to get into the windmill to open the gate forwards, but here you'll find the first trip bomb. You can deal with these in the same way as in the original, only now you can retract the wire and leave the bomb on the wall, meaning you can bait an enemy into standing near it, and then shoot it to blow them up. Inside the windmill, the system for opening the gate is missing a gear.
Gotta fix everything myself.
And you go into the barn to retrieve it, only to meet the Hammer Brute. These guys are about as tough as Dr. Salvador. They can kick you, swing their hammer, and even do a helicopter spin to attack repeatedly. Although the game does prompt you to duck to avoid that last one. They hit hard, but I'd say they're a little easier to take down than Dr. Salvador. Notably, this isn't actually a new enemy. These guys are introduced in Section 5-1 of the original, all the way at the end of that game, but in the remake, they were moved all the way to the start. Now that the gate's open, you'll notice that the path now splits past this bridge and in front of this big cabin. Going to your right, the button-mashing QTE boulder chase has been replaced with a single press QTE to avoid a landslide. This is actually the only non-combat QTE in the whole game. All the others have been removed. The path now has a few enemies, but it still leads to a tunnel. The clearing with the houses at the end is designed the same, but now it's adjacent to the lake. It has all the same dynamiters, but it also has boats, nets, and lots of other fishing equipment as props littered around. The dynamiters themselves remain the same, and there's even a new one on top of some newly added ramparts on the left. Other than the new rampart and a locked door to a cave at the back, the area stays the same. You hear the knocking in the cabin again, and going through it, you'll find a picture, some science equipment, and some personal effects. Once you reach the wardrobe, you'll open it and find some ammo. Turning to your right, you'll see that the knocking is an enemy battering the floor, trying to open a hatch. Kill him, and open the way to find a very active body bag in the basement.
That hurts, you know?
Seemed like you really wanted to talk.
How observant, senor. Now, say, you got a smoke?
You know, those things will kill you.
Oh, well, maybe just untie me then, huh? Joder, not this guy!
Who are you? Okay, stop right there!
All before you get captured by Chief Mendez, and he even injects you with something pretty nasty looking, ending the first chapter. Every time you finish a chapter, you'll also get a similar screen to the original, only there's no character and it doesn't show you what's next. It'll also show some additional statistics, like the chapter playtime and the times you took damage. And from here, you can also save and look back at your previous chapter results. So as a remake of the opening of the original, I was pretty damn impressed. I think it makes some excellent changes. The optional movement from the village editions is pretty great. The stealth lets you approach the area for the first time in a whole new way. And the parry helps you engage with the combat differently. In regards to the events of the chapter, there really are no changes. You go to a cabin after you stop, fight an enemy, fight a few enemies on a trail, anger the village, explore the farm, avoid getting crushed, and then fight the dynamiters. So far, the remake has stayed almost completely faithful, the only big changes being the change to the boulder QTE, and the farm path splitting further. The path splitting further does show a cabin we will definitely come back to later, and it's a very effective tease for later events that new players will wonder about and veterans of the original game will get a real kick out of. The farm itself was a little remixed, but all the important parts were there. Both barns, the ramparts on the bigger one, and the shack to save in. In fact, that last building has been rotated to face you upon walking into the area, so you're more likely to walk in and see that you can save. And of course, the windmill interior is new. The remake does this quite a lot, taking an area from the original and moving around all the elements to change how you approach them. There's some more examples of this in the second chapter, so I'll be talking about it more momentarily. Overall, I was very, very happy with how the remake opened. Every set piece was there. I had no right to complain at all. It was so accurate, down to the placement of the barrels. But anyways, the whole point is that it was so accurate that a lot of my pessimism was gone. Sure, I had some doubts left in my head, but this opening showing was so good that I was starting to feel pretty confident that, hey, maybe this might match up to the original in terms of quality. Did it? Well, we'll see.